The Great Hall of the Galactic Council stretched out like a vast arena. 12 different species sat in their assigned sections, each area designed for their specific needs. They sat in elevated platforms that suited their tall, thin bodies. The crystalline hegemony occupied spaces filled with the specific light frequencies they needed. The void swimmers floated in tanks of their home atmosphere. At the center of it all sat the human delegation. Their section looked plain compared to the others. Simple chairs, basic lighting, no special equipment. Ambassador Wei sat quietly, her hands folded on the table. She wore a simple blue diplomatic uniform that looked almost boring next to the elaborate displays of the other species. The chamber buzzed with nervous energy. Today was the day of the vote that everyone had been talking about for months. Resolution 847C would change everything for humanity in galactic politics. Ambassador Or stood up. His long, thin frame made him tower over his speaking platform. His voice carried clearly through the translation systems that let all species understand each other. Fellow council members, Or began, his voice filled with authority. Today we vote on a matter of galactic security. The humans have expanded too quickly. They have grown too strong too fast. In just 200 years, they have spread across 40 star systems. They build ships faster than any of us thought possible. Their technology advances at a rate that concerns many of our scientists. Murmurs of agreement came from several sections of the chamber. The crystalline hegemony's representative, a being of living crystal named Shard of Ancient Light, pulsed with colors that the translation system interpreted as strong agreement. Or continued his speech. The humans claim to be peaceful, but look at their history. They fought wars on their home planet for thousands of years. They only stopped fighting each other when they found the rest of us. What happens when they decide we are their enemies? More voices joined in agreement. The void swimmers made their strange musical sounds that meant support. Several smaller species that often followed the lead also voiced their backing. Resolution 847C will put proper limits on human expansion, Or said. It will require them to ask permission before settling new worlds. It will tax their trade ships to fund galactic security. It will make sure they remain a small part of galactic civilization instead of taking it over. When Or finished, the chamber fell quiet. All eyes turned to the human section. Ambassador had been taking notes the entire time, her pen moving steadily across her tablet. She looked calm, almost relaxed. The council speaker, an ancient being from the eternal archives, called out in her whispering voice. The human delegation may now respond to the charges and defend their position. Stood up slowly. She was not tall like Or, and she did not glow like the crystalline beings. She did not float or make musical sounds. She just stood there like a normal person and spoke in a clear, steady voice. Honored council members, she began. We have listened to Ambassador Or's concerns. We understand that our rapid growth worries some of you. We understand that our history of conflict on Earth makes some of you nervous. She paused and looked around the chamber, making eye contact with representatives from different species. But we ask you to look at our actions since joining the galactic community. We have never started a war. We have never broken a treaty. We have never refused to help when disasters struck your worlds. When the plague hit the colonies, human doctors worked day and night to find a cure. When the botanical collectives was struck by solar flares, human engineers helped rebuild their cities. Some representatives nodded at these reminders. The delegate clicked his mandibles in agreement. The plant-like representative of the botanical collective swayed in what humans had learned was their way of showing approval. Continued. We have built trade routes that benefit everyone. Our hyperspace relay network connects worlds that could never talk to each other before. Our shipping companies carry cargo for dozens of species. Our researchers share every discovery we make. She picked up her tablet and looked at it briefly. If this resolution passes, we will respect the Council's decision. We are not here to threaten anyone or make demands. We only ask that you think carefully about what this vote really means. Think about what you are asking us to become. and think about what galactic civilization will look like if you decide that growing strong is the same as becoming dangerous. Sat down. That was it. No angry words, no threats, no dramatic speeches. Just a simple, quiet response that left many representatives looking thoughtful. The debate continued for several more hours. The three species that supported humanity spoke up. The representative reminded everyone of human help during crises. The botanical collective talked about joint research projects. Most surprising was the Eternal Archives, who rarely took sides in political votes. The humans have shared more knowledge with the archives in 2 centuries than some species have shared in 2,000 years, whispered the archive speaker. They ask questions we never thought to ask. They find answers we never looked for. This resolution will hurt all of galactic civilization, not just humanity. But fear was stronger than gratitude for most of the council. The vote was called, and the results appeared on the great display that all could see. 9 species voted yes, 3 voted no. Resolution 847C had passed. The chamber erupted in mixed reactions. Some sections cheered, others sat in worried silence. The human section remained perfectly quiet. Ambassador stood up again. She bowed respectfully to the council speaker, then turned to address the chamber one final time. The human delegation accepts this vote, she said. However, we cannot remain members of a council that has chosen to treat us as a threat rather than as partners. Effective immediately, humanity withdraws from the Galactic Council. We will remove all our people and equipment from council space within 1 standard week. The chamber fell completely silent. This was not what anyone had expected. Most thought the humans would argue or negotiate or ask for changes to the resolution. No one had thought they would simply leave. Gathered her things and walked toward the exit, followed by the rest of the human delegation. At the door, she turned back one final time. "We wish you all well," she said. "We hope you find what you are looking for." Then the humans were gone, and the council was left to wonder what they had just done. Dr. In of the Eternal Archive stood in her laboratory, watching her human colleague pack his research equipment. Dr. James had worked with her for 15 years. Together, they had made discoveries about ancient galactic civilizations that changed how everyone understood history. "You do not have to do this," In said, her whispering voice filled with sadness. "Your research here is too important. The council vote does not mean you must leave the archives." James carefully wrapped a delicate instrument in protective cloth before placing it in his container. He had done this packing routine many times before, moving from dig site to dig site across the galaxy. But this time felt different. This time felt final. "The vote means everything, Dr. In," he replied softly. "The council decided that humans are dangerous, that we grow too fast and cannot be trusted. How can I continue working here when my own government has been told we are not welcome?" "But your people voted against the resolution," In protested. "The archives supported humanity." James smiled sadly as he sealed the container. "I know, and we will not forget that, but we cannot stay where we are not wanted by the majority." Across the galaxy, similar scenes played out on hundreds of worlds. Human researchers, engineers, traders, and workers quietly packed their belongings and left. There were no angry protests, no dramatic speeches, no threats of revenge. The humans simply gathered their things and went home. On the industrial world of Prime, or watched the human work crews boarding their transport ships. As the mining supervisor for this sector, he had worked with these humans for over a decade. They maintained the deep mining equipment that extracted rare minerals from the planet's core. "When will their replacements arrive?" or asked his assistant. The younger looked confused. "Replacements? I thought our own engineers would take over the work." Or felt a cold worry creep into his mind. The mining equipment was incredibly old and complex. The original builders, a species called the architects, had vanished thousands of years ago. The machines still worked, but only because the humans had figured out how to maintain them. Engineers had tried to understand the ancient technology, but it was too different from their own designs. Contact the engineering department immediately, or ordered. We need full technical teams down here before the next shift. In space, the vast hyperspace relay network that connected the galaxy began to go dark. The network had been humanity's greatest contribution to galactic civilization. Before the relays, traveling between distant stars could take months or even years. With the network, ships could cross the galaxy in days. The humans had built most of the relay stations and maintained all of them. The technology was complex, requiring constant adjustments and repairs. Other species could use the relays, but only humans truly understood how they worked. Captain of the crystalline hegemony watched in growing alarm as relay station after relay station stopped responding to signals. His patrol ship was stranded halfway between two star systems when the local relay went offline. "Can we reach the next system without the relay?" he asked his navigator. "Yes, Captain," came the reply, "but it will take 6 months instead of 6 hours." Similar problems spread across Council space. Trade routes that had operated smoothly for decades suddenly became impossible to maintain. Communication networks slowed to a crawl as messages had to travel the long way between systems. Doctor of the Void Swimmers floated in her medical bay, looking at test results that made no sense. The great bioships of her people were getting sick, and she could not figure out why. For the past 50 years, human doctors had helped treat the massive living vessels that served as cities for the Void Swimmers. The humans had understood something about bioship health that her own people had missed. They asked strange questions about nutrition and exercise that seemed silly at first, but their treatments worked. Now, without human veterinarians, the bioships were developing new illnesses that traditional void swimmer medicine could not cure. Meanwhile, strange things were happening in the 3-star systems that had voted against the resolution. The Republic announced new trade agreements with humanity. Human ships that had left Council space were welcome in ports. Human researchers were invited to continue their work in universities. The Botanical Collective made similar announcements. Human agricultural experts would help develop new farming techniques on collective worlds. Human engineers would assist with environmental restoration projects that had been struggling for years. Most surprising of all, the Eternal Archive signed an exclusive research partnership with humanity. All human archaeological and historical research would now be conducted jointly with archive scholars. The archives would share their vast knowledge databases with human researchers. Ambassador or received increasingly urgent reports from colonies. Without human shipping companies, trade was becoming difficult and expensive. Companies had relied on human cargo vessels because they were reliable and cost much less than building their own fleet. The mining operation on Prime had shut down completely. Engineers could not figure out how to maintain the ancient architect machinery. 3 other mining worlds reported similar problems. The economy, which depended heavily on mineral exports, began to show signs of stress. How did we not know about this dependency, or demand it of his advisors? The humans never advertised their importance, one advisor explained. They just quietly did their jobs. We assumed anyone could do what they did. But it was becoming clear that this assumption was wrong. Humans had a unique talent for making different technologies work together. They could take ancient alien machines and modern equipment from a dozen different species and somehow make them all function as a single system. On the research station orbiting the hegemony's capital world, Crystal Commander Shard of Deep Thought discovered that 30% of the station's critical systems had been maintained by human technicians. The systems used a mix of crystalline technology, power systems, and archive data storage. Only the humans had understood how to make them all work together. Without human maintenance, the systems began to fail one by one. Emergency meetings were called across Council space as the scope of the problem became clear. Humans had not just been participants in galactic civilization. They had been the glue that held different technologies and systems together. The quiet exodus continued. Human civilians who had married into other species were invited to bring their families to human space. Most accepted. Human students left their universities. Human artists packed up their studios. Dr. N stood alone in her laboratory, looking at research projects that would now take decades to complete without human assistance. Outside her window, she could see the transport ships carrying the last humans away from Archive Central. The galaxy suddenly felt much larger and much more empty than it had just a week before. Crystal Station was the pride of the crystalline hegemony. The massive space habitat housed 12 million beings and served as the center of hegemony government. It floated in perfect formation with 3 smaller stations, all connected by bridges of living crystal that sparkled with their own inner light. Commander Shard of Ancient Glory was reviewing daily reports when the first power fluctuation hit. The lights in her command center dimmed for just a moment before returning to normal. She barely noticed it. The second fluctuation lasted longer. The third caused several systems to shut down temporarily. By the fourth, Shard of Ancient Glory was calling for an emergency technical team. The fusion reactors are becoming unstable, reported Chief Engineer Prism of Deep Knowledge. The containment fields are fluctuating in ways we have never seen before. What is causing this? Demanded the commander. Prism of Deep Knowledge's crystal body flickered with colors that showed uncertainty and fear. We do not know. The reactors have operated perfectly for 30 years, but the maintenance logs show that human engineers performed all major repairs and adjustments. The truth hit both of them at the same moment. The exotic fusion reactors that powered Crystal Station were based on technology from 6 different species. Only humans had understood how to make all the different systems work together safely. "Where are the technical manuals?" asked Shard of Ancient Glory. "The humans took them when they left," Prism of Deep Knowledge replied. "They said the manuals were their intellectual property." 6 hours later, Crystal Station lost main power completely. Emergency systems kept life support running, but 12 million beings found themselves trapped in a darkened habitat with failing air recycling and no way to leave. The crisis at Crystal Station was just the beginning. Across Council space, infrastructure that had operated smoothly for decades began to fail in spectacular ways. On the Void Swimmer, the bioships were dying. The massive living vessels that served as cities for millions of swimmers had developed a wasting disease that their own doctors could not identify or treat. High Swimmer Melody of Deep Currents floated in her medical bay, watching her people try desperately to save their oldest bioship. Current Trider had been home to 3 generations of swimmers. Now it was slowly dying, its biological systems failing one by one. "The human doctors would have known what to do," whispered low Swimmer Harmony of Tides. "They understood bioship health in ways we never could." Melody of Deep Currents sang a low, sad note. The humans had treated bioship illness like they treated diseases in animals on their own world. They asked questions about diet, exercise, stress, and environment that void swimmers had never thought to ask. Their treatments seemed simple, but they worked. Now, without human veterinarians, the swimmers were watching their cities die. Similar problems appeared everywhere. On worlds, mining operations shut down as ancient machinery broke beyond repair. Agricultural systems failed when the complex environmental controls stopped working. Archive research stations lost their ability to access historical databases as the connecting networks collapsed. Dr. N worked day and night to understand what was happening. As one of the galaxy's leading experts on system analysis, she had been asked by the Archive Council to investigate the spreading failures. What she found shocked her. "The humans were not just participants in our civilization," she reported to an emergency session of Archive leaders. "They were the maintenance staff for the entire galaxy." She displayed her research on the great screens of the Archive Council chamber. Charts and graphs showed the extent of human involvement in galactic infrastructure. In the past 200 years, Humans have been directly involved in maintaining 34% of all critical systems across Council space, and continued. But their indirect involvement is much higher. They created the standards and procedures that allowed different technologies to work together. The archive leaders listened in growing horror, as In explained her findings. Every species in the Council has different approaches to engineering and technology, she said. The crystalline hegemony grows their machines from living crystal. The void swimmers breed their technology as living organisms. The build with metals and ceramics. These technologies should not be able to work together. But they do work together, observed archive speaker Whisper of Ancient Days. They work because humans figured out how to make them compatible, In replied. Humans have a unique talent for improvisation and adaptation. They can take any technology and find a way to make it work with any other technology. Over 2 centuries, they quietly became the bridge between all our different engineering approaches. The implications were staggering. Without humans, the different species of the Council could not maintain the integrated systems that modern galactic civilization depended on. Worse, they had forgotten how to build purely single-species systems because it was more efficient to use the human-integrated approach. Reports continued to pour in from across Council space. The government was facing riots as mining colonies failed and unemployment skyrocketed. 3 hegemony stations had declared independence rather than accept help from their failing central government. The Void Swimmers' High Council was in emergency session as more bioships fell ill. Meanwhile, very different reports came from the 3 worlds that had allied with humanity. The Republic announced breakthrough discoveries in quantum computing, achieved through joint human research teams. The Botanical Collective revealed new biotechnology that promised to revolutionize agriculture across the galaxy. The archives reported unprecedented progress in understanding ancient galactic history. The contrast was impossible to ignore. Worlds that worked with humans were thriving. Worlds that had rejected humans were falling apart. Ambassador found himself fighting for his political life as colony after colony reported system failures. His own government was blaming him for the vote that had driven away humanity. You said they were dangerous, accused Counselor during a heated emergency session. You said they were expanding too fast and could not be trusted. You never mentioned that our entire economy depended on them. How was I supposed to know? Replied desperately. They never told us how important they were. They just did their jobs quietly. That is exactly the problem, shot back. They were doing jobs that kept our civilization running, and we voted to throw them out without understanding what they actually did. The same conversations were happening in government buildings across Council space. Leaders who had supported Resolution 847C were being called to explain how they had missed humanity's crucial role in maintaining galactic civilization. Dr. In published her full report for all Council species to read. The document, titled The Human Integration Analysis, became the most downloaded file in archive history. The statistics it contained painted a clear picture of how deeply humans had become integrated into every aspect of galactic society. The report's conclusion was stark. Without human technical knowledge and integration skills, current Council civilization cannot be maintained in its present form. Individual species systems can be preserved, but the interconnected nature of modern galactic society requires human participation to function. As power failures spread and bioships continued to die, as mining operations shut down and communication networks collapsed, the Council faced a harsh truth. They had not voted to limit human expansion. They had voted to destroy their own civilization. And the humans were nowhere to be found. The Galactic Council chamber looked different than it had just 8 months before. Several sections sat empty where representatives had been recalled by their home governments. The lighting was dimmer because the power grid that served the Council station was failing. Emergency repairs had been attempted, but without human engineers, the fixes were temporary at best. Ambassador of the stood where had once stood. The previous ambassador had been removed from office when his government fell. 3 other species had also seen their governments collapse as infrastructure failures destroyed their economies. "Fellow council members," began, her voice carrying a desperation that would have been unthinkable months earlier. "We are here to address the greatest crisis in galactic history, not because of war or natural disaster, but because of our own mistake." The chamber was unusually quiet. Gone was the confident chatter and political maneuvering that had once filled the space. Everyone present knew they were witnessing the collapse of their civilization. 8 months ago, we voted to restrict human expansion because we feared they were becoming too powerful, continued. We told ourselves we were protecting galactic stability. Instead, we destroyed it. She activated a holographic display showing the current state of council space. Large sections of the map were colored red, indicating critical infrastructure failures. Yellow areas showed systems operating at reduced capacity. Green areas, showing normal operations, were becoming increasingly rare. "I propose immediate and complete reversal of Resolution 847C, announced. "I propose a formal apology to humanity and an invitation for them to return to the Council with full membership and voting rights." Shard of Deep Thought, now representing the crystalline hegemony after his predecessor died in the Crystal Station disaster, pulsed with colors showing reluctant agreement. "The hegemony supports this proposal," he said. "We have lost 2 major stations and our capital world is operating on emergency power. Our people are demanding action." One by one, the remaining council species voiced their support. Even those who had opposed humanity most strongly now begged for their return. The vote was unanimous. But passage of the motion was only the beginning of their problems. "How do we contact them?" asked the representative of the Void Swimmers, her song filled with worry. "All human diplomatic channels went silent months ago. We do not even know where their government is now based." It was true. When humans left council space, they had taken their entire diplomatic infrastructure with them. The embassies were empty, the communication networks were shut down, and the trade representatives had all gone home. The council had no way to reach the human government. "We know there are still some human civilians in council space," suggested the representative. "Perhaps we can ask them to carry a message." But when they checked, they found that most human civilians had already left. Those who remained were family members who had married into other species, and even they were receiving messages encouraging them to come home. Dr. Sarah, who had married an engineer 5 years earlier, stood in the council's communication center with a message from her brother on New Geneva Colony. "The Terran Cooperative would be happy to provide sanctuary for you and your family," the message read. "We understand that council space is experiencing difficulties. All humans and their families are welcome in cooperative space." Sarah looked at the council officials who had asked her to help contact the human government. "I am sorry," she said, "but I think my husband and I will be leaving next week. The situation here is getting too dangerous." Meanwhile, reports from Human Allied Space painted a very different picture. The Republic announced the successful test of a new type of hyperspace drive that was twice as efficient as the old relay system. The breakthrough had come from joint human research teams working together. The Botanical Collective revealed new biotechnology that could turn dead worlds into garden planets in just a few decades. Again, the discovery was the result of human-alien cooperation. Most impressive of all, the Eternal Archives released findings from their joint research with humanity. Ancient ruins that had puzzled archaeologists for thousands of years were finally being understood. Humans brought new perspectives that unlocked secrets the galaxy had been trying to discover for. "They are not just surviving without us," observed Archive Keeper during a private meeting with. "They are thriving. The humans have taken their talent for integration and applied it to willing partners instead of reluctant ones." Studied the reports from Human Allied Space with growing despair. While Council civilization crumbled, humanity was building something new and better. "What are they calling this new alliance of theirs?" she asked. "The Terran Cooperative," In replied. "It is not an empire or a federation. It is a voluntary association of species who choose to work together. Each member keeps their independence but shares knowledge and resources freely." The contrast was stark. The council space was built on political control and careful balance of power between species. The Terran Cooperative was built on voluntary cooperation and shared benefits. One was falling apart while the other grew stronger every day. A desperate mission was authorized. The Council's fastest remaining ship would travel to known human colonies and attempt to negotiate humanity's return. The ship would carry formal apologies, offers of full Council membership for all human allies, and promises of complete reversal of all anti-human policies. But when the mission ship reached the nearest human colony, they found it empty. The humans had moved on, leaving behind only automated beacons directing travelers to contact the Terran Cooperative through official channels. Those channels, when finally located, were politely unhelpful. "The Terran Cooperative appreciates the Council's interest in renewed relations," came the formal response. "However, we are currently focused on building our new alliance with species who share our values of cooperation and mutual respect. We wish the Council well in their future endeavors." It was a diplomatic way of saying no. Back on the Council station, emergency sessions continued around the clock. But the problems were growing faster than any solutions could be implemented. Without human integration knowledge, each repair attempt created new failures. Systems that had worked together smoothly for decades now interfered with each other. They tried to rebuild their mining operations using only their own technology, but their systems could not process the exotic materials that had been refined using human-integrated equipment. The crystalline hegemony attempted to redesign their stations using only crystal technology, but they had forgotten how to build purely crystal power systems. Most heartbreaking of all, the Void Swimmers watched helplessly as their eldest bioships died one by one. Their own medical knowledge, advanced as it was, could not replace the intuitive understanding that human doctors had developed. "We are going backwards," In reported to another emergency council session. "Without human integration skills, we cannot maintain current technology levels. We are having to abandon advanced systems and return to older, simpler approaches that our individual species can handle alone." The implications were clear. Council space was not just experiencing temporary difficulties. It was undergoing technological regression. The sophisticated, interconnected civilization they had built was being replaced by simpler, separate systems that each species could manage independently. As the meeting ended, stood alone in the great chamber. Half the seats were now empty, their occupants recalled by failing governments. The remaining representatives looked tired and defeated. Outside the great windows, she could see ships leaving the station. More refugees fleeing the collapsing infrastructure of council space. Some were heading for Terran cooperative worlds, hoping to find the stability and prosperity that their own governments could no longer provide. The humans had offered them partnership. Instead, the council had chosen fear. Now they were learning the true cost of that choice. 2 years had passed since the humans quietly retreated from council space. The galaxy had settled into a new pattern, but it was nothing like what anyone had expected when Resolution 847C was first proposed. Archive Keeper In stood on the observation deck of the transport ship Eternal Wisdom as it approached New Geneva Colony. Through the windows, she could see a thriving world that looked nothing like the struggling planets she had left behind in council space. Cities sprawled across green continents, their lights twinkling in organized patterns that spoke of careful planning and abundant energy. Orbital stations dotted the space around the planet, connected by streams of traffic that moved with smooth efficiency. Everything looked clean, modern, and prosperous. It was In's first visit to Terran cooperative space. She had come as an official ambassador from the archives, one of the few council institutions that still maintained diplomatic relations with humanity. The contrast with what she had left behind was shocking. Council space had learned to survive without humans, but it had never recovered. The great hyperspace relay network had partially collapsed, leaving some sectors isolated for months at a time. Trade between council worlds moved at a fraction of its former speed. Most devastating of all, technological progress had essentially stopped. Without human innovation and integration skills, each species had been forced to retreat into their own technological approaches. The used-only technology. The crystalline hegemony rebuilt their systems using only crystal methods. It worked, after a fashion, but it was primitive compared to what they had achieved when humans helped different technologies work together. The transport docked at New Geneva's main orbital station, and In was amazed by what she saw. The station used technology from at least 6 different species, all working together seamlessly. Biocomputers managed traffic flow while botanical air recycling systems kept the atmosphere fresh. Human engineering tied it all together into a system that was more efficient than anything a single species could have built alone. Ambassador Wei met at the docking bay. She looked older than she had 2 years ago, but also more relaxed. The stress lines that had marked her face during the final council sessions were gone, replaced by the confident expression of someone who was building rather than fighting. Dr. In said with genuine warmth, "Welcome to New Geneva. I hope your journey was comfortable." It was illuminating, In replied, looking around at the bustling station. "Everything here works so smoothly. It reminds me of how council space used to function." Nodded as they walked through corridors filled with beings from dozens of different species. Humans worked alongside botanicals and several species that In did not recognize. "These are some of our newer partners," explained when she noticed In's curiosity. "The geometric builders from the Andromeda approaches, the wave dancers from the galactic edge, and the echo people from the dark nebula regions. They were never part of the council, but they were interested in joining our cooperative." They took a shuttle down to the planet's surface, landing at a diplomatic complex that overlooked a vast city. The buildings were a fascinating mix of architectural styles, each reflecting the aesthetic preferences of different species, but somehow working together as a unified whole. In's office, with its view of the thriving city below, the 2 women sat down to discuss the reason for In's visit. "The archives would like to propose expanded cooperation between our institutions," In began formally. "We believe that joint research would benefit both our peoples." Smiled, "Dr. In, you do not need to make formal proposals. The archives supported us when the council voted against humanity. We remember our friends." They talked for hours about research projects, cultural exchanges, and technological cooperation. But eventually, the conversation turned to the larger question that hung between them. "We underestimated you," In said quietly. "We saw your military capabilities and your rapid expansion, but we missed what you actually contributed to our civilization." Was quiet for a moment, looking out at the city where humans and aliens worked together to build something new. "You saw us as competitors when we were partners," she said finally. "Humans do not just take from other species. We connect, we maintain, we solve problems. We find ways to make different approaches work together. When the council decided it did not want that kind of partnership." She gestured toward the city below, where the lights were beginning to come on as evening approached. "We found other species who did want it," continued. "The Republic, the Botanical Collective, your own archives. And through them, we met species from outside council space who were interested in true cooperation rather than political control." In understood. The council had been built on the idea that different species needed to be carefully balanced against each other to prevent anyone from becoming too powerful. The Terran Cooperative was built on the opposite idea, that different species could accomplish more by working together than by competing. "How many worlds are part of the cooperative now?" In asked. 47 species across 130 star systems," replied. We are growing every month as more worlds decide they prefer cooperation to isolation. The numbers were staggering. The Council had 12 member species across maybe 60 systems, and they were barely holding together. The Terran Cooperative had nearly 4 times as many systems and was expanding rapidly. They talked late into the night about the future, made it clear that individual Council species were welcome to join the cooperative if they chose to, but the Council as an institution was not welcome. Too much damage had been done to trust it again. When Anne finally returned to Council space, she carried with her a vision of what galactic civilization could have become if fear had not overruled wisdom. The Council chambers were smaller now. 3 species had withdrawn entirely, their governments collapsed, and their territories independent. The remaining 9 species met in a chamber that felt too large for their diminished numbers. Ambassador stood at the podium, where or had once delivered his speech against humanity. Now, she delivered reports that grew more discouraging each month. The Sector 7 relay network has failed completely, she announced to the sparse assembly. We no longer have real-time communication with our outer colonies. Trade ships are taking 3 months to complete routes that once took 3 days. The representatives listened in weary silence. They had heard similar reports many times before. Infrastructure continued to decay. Their technology was becoming more primitive each year. Young people were leaving for Terran cooperative space in increasing numbers. The Eternal Archives has announced another joint project with the humans, continued. They claim to have discovered the location of the original architect. The expedition will include human archaeologists and engineers. There was no longer any anger in the chamber when such announcements were made, just sadness and resignation. Everyone understood that the archives were making the right choice for their people. As the session ended, stood alone in the great chamber, she looked up at the empty galleries where observers had once watched council proceedings. Now there was no one left who cared enough to attend. The chamber's lights flickered as they often did these days. The backup power systems were struggling to maintain even basic functions. Outside the great windows, she could see fewer ships than before. The once busy traffic around the council station had dwindled to a few aging vessels. She thought about the vote that had started everything. Resolution 847C, designed to protect the galaxy from human expansion. Instead, it had protected humans from galactic collapse. The humans had offered them partnership in building something greater than any single species could achieve alone. The Council had chosen fear instead, afraid that working together meant losing independence. Now the Council sat in darkening chambers, governing smaller territories with failing technology, while the galaxy moved on without them. The humans had not conquered or destroyed galactic civilization. They had simply taken their gifts elsewhere, to species wise enough to value cooperation over control. The lights flickered again, and wondered how much longer they would keep working at all. In the silence of the empty chamber, she could hear the quiet hum of failing systems and the distant sound of another ship leaving for more prosperous space. The humans had retreated quietly, and the Council was left to answer for its actions. The answer was written in every failing system, every darkened world, every young person who chose to leave for a brighter future among the stars. They had voted for safety and gotten isolation. They had voted for control and gotten collapse. Most of all, they had voted against cooperation and learned too late that in a galaxy full of different species, cooperation was the only thing that really mattered. Outside the windows, the stars shone as brightly as ever, but the Council's ability to reach them grew dimmer each day.